When I arrived at the small family dinner, I saw 81 guests and a banner that read "Welcome, baby." I wore a loose blouse, tied my hair into a bun, and added a bit of lipstick, nothing too dramatic. After all, it was supposed to be just a small family dinner. But when I opened the door and 81 people turned to look at me, all I could do was stand there in silence as my eyes landed on a massive banner above the fireplace that read, "Welcome, baby. My name is Amina, and I'm 31 years old. I work as a mid-level manager at a digital marketing firm, love quiet bookstores, and until recently, considered myself a pretty private person. But the night of that so-called family dinner shattered everything I thought I knew about boundaries, and about my family. I remember standing at the threshold, my hand still gripping the doorknob. Laughter, conversations, clinking cutlery, it all froze the moment they saw me. My cousin Maliha's mouth was wide open in excitement, and she was the first to yell, "Surprise." But I didn't step in. Not yet. I was still processing the number of people, and that ridiculous banner. What exactly were they celebrating? I hadn't told a soul, not even my best friend, that I was 11 weeks pregnant. My fiancé, Adil, had walked up right behind me, probably expecting something like a potluck and a few nosy ants. Instead, his jaw dropped when he saw the crowd and the decorations, blue and pink streamers, a table piled with cupcakes, even a photo booth that said "Mommy to be." My stomach churned. Had someone been reading my medical files? My mother appeared at the front of the crowd like a star performer on stage, grinning from ear to ear. She held a sparkling grape juice glass in one hand and motioned for everyone to quiet down. "Amina, you're glowing. Look at our mommy to be," she called. My knees nearly buckled. I hadn't even told her. Or at least, I didn't mean to. I stepped inside, slowly, as though I were entering an ambush. Adil put his hand gently on my back, whispering, "Do you want to leave?" But I couldn't, not when half the guests had their phones pointed at me, ready to snap photos. I pasted on a weak smile. "Not yet," I whispered back. I needed answers before I could escape. The living room had been completely transformed. Every surface was covered in pink and blue decor. My little cousin Salma even wore a onesie that said, "Cousin in training." What was going on? I turned toward my mom, who by now had tears in her eyes and was motioning me toward a chair decorated like a throne. I shook my head. "Mom," I said, "can we talk privately?" But she just laughed. "Oh, don't be silly, sweetheart," she said. "Let them cheer for you, you deserve this." She wrapped her arms around me, and in that moment, I felt like I was being smothered by good intentions. I looked over her shoulder at the guests, people I hadn't seen in years, some who didn't even know my middle name. How could they all know I was pregnant? When I hadn't told anyone, I finally pulled away from her and grabbed Adil's hand. "We need to go to the kitchen," I whispered urgently. We slipped away as politely as we could while my aunt tried to hand me a mom-to-be sash. The moment we were behind the kitchen door, I turned to Adil. "This is insane. I didn't tell anyone. I swear." His face paled. "What about the app?" My heart skipped. The pregnancy tracking app one used, could it have posted something online? By mistake? I grabbed my phone and checked every social media platform. Nothing. All private. No posts, no updates. I opened the app, it hadn't even been synced. That left only one horrifying possibility. Someone had snooped, and then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. 2 weeks ago, I'd had terrible morning sickness and had fainted in the bathroom. My mom had rushed over to help, son invited, of course, but I was too weak to protest. I remembered her picking up my phone to call the doctor. Did she open the app? I stormed back into the living room, trying to stay calm. My mom was holding up a baby blanket, showing off the embroidery. "Mom," I said sharply, and everyone turned to me. "Can I speak with you now?" She looked mildly annoyed, but followed me to the hallway. "What's wrong?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. I took a deep breath, trying not to explode. "Did you tell everyone I was pregnant?" I asked, voice low but firm. Her smile faltered. She looked around as if checking if we were alone, then said, "Honey, I didn't tell them. I just hinted. And it was obvious, anyway. You've been tired, you've gained a little weight." I couldn't believe my ears. "You guessed I was pregnant, and then you threw a party based on a guess?" I was shaking. "Do you realize how personal this is? How early it is? There could still be complications. I haven't even had my second scan yet." She blinked at me. "But I was just trying to celebrate you." Adil joined us in the hallway, clearly trying to be the peacemaker. "Auntie, I know you meant well, but this wasn't your news to share, or even to assume." My mom's face turned defensive. "You two are always keeping secrets. You don't understand what it means to include family." But what did inclusion mean when it came with invasion? Back in the living room, people had started handing around a guestbook titled Letters to Baby. I could barely breathe. I watched as someone scribbled in it, smiling and laughing. None of them understood what it felt like to lose control of your own life. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. One of my cousins started a guessing game. What's the baby's gender? Due date? Will the name start with an A like mommy? People cheered and waved index cards with their guesses. I felt sick to my stomach, because none of this was funny anymore. I looked at Adil and nodded. He seemed to understand immediately. We both walked to the center of the room. I tapped a fork against a glass and said, "Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here, but I need to say something." The room quieted like someone had flipped a switch. I took a deep breath. This wasn't my idea, I began. And honestly, I wasn't ready to share this news yet. I'm only 11 weeks along. A lot can still happen. And I feel incredibly violated that something so personal was made into a party before I had time to even process it myself. A murmur rippled through the room. My mother stood frozen, her expression unreadable. I know many of you meant well, I continued, but what I really needed tonight was rest. And privacy. So thank you again, but I'm leaving now. And just like that, I turned around and walked out. Adil followed silently, squeezing my hand. My heart pounded the whole way back to the car. I didn't speak until we were halfway home. Do you think I was too harsh? I asked him, glancing sideways. He looked at me with that same quiet strength. No. You did what you had to do. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed constantly, apologies, angry messages, questions. But I ignored them all. The only message I responded to was from my younger sister, who simply wrote, "You were brave." I cried reading it. Because bravery wasn't what I felt. In the days that followed, the backlash came hard and fast. A few relatives claimed I was ungrateful. One uncle said I was too Western now. My mom didn't speak to me for a week. She said I embarrassed her in front of everyone. But I held firm. Because this wasn't about her. It was about me, and my baby. Eventually, my mother came over again, this time uninvited and unannounced. But instead of barging in, she rang the bell. I answered it, and she just stood there, hands clasped. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't understand how much it hurt you." For the first time in a long time, I saw her, not as my mother, but as a woman trying to reconnect. That we talked for hours that day. She explained how hard it was for her to accept that her little girl didn't need constant protecting. I explained how deeply I needed boundaries. And somehow, we found middle ground. She even asked permission before sharing the news with anyone else. That meant everything to me. Now, I'm 33 weeks along. We're not having a big baby shower. Just a quiet gathering with 5 close friends. And some takeout. My mom's bringing handmade booties and a small fruitcake. No banners. No photos. No speeches. Just love and permission. And if you're wondering what happened to the Letters to Baby guest book, I did read it eventually. Some pages made me cry. Others made me laugh. I've kept it tucked away, not because the people were wrong, but because the timing was point. One day, when my child is old enough, I'll read it to them because I want them to know that even in a world full of noise, their mother fought for the right to whisper their name when she was ready, and whisper it I did. Months later, in the quiet of a dim hospital room, with just Adil by my side and soft rain tapping against the window pane. I held our daughter to my chest, her tiny heart fluttering gently against mine, and I whispered her name, Serena. It means serenity. And in that moment, I understood it in my bones. Serena's birth wasn't a grand affair. No balloons. No family countdowns. Just raw, unfiltered emotion, the kind that comes when you've fought through chaos to find peace. When the nurse asked if we wanted to call family, I hesitated. Not because I didn't love them, but because I wasn't ready to let the world in. Not just yet. Hadil understood. He always did. We stayed in that hospital room for the full 48 hours, not because we had to, but because it felt like a sacred cocoon. I watched Serena sleep, memorized the curve of her cheek, the way her fist would instinctively curl around my finger. It was a miracle. I didn't want diluted by commentary or unsolicited advice, but I knew that outside those walls, a different storm was building. My mother had been texting constantly in those final weeks. She was trying, really trying, to respect my boundaries. But old habits die hard. She still tried to guess the due date. She still sent nursery color palettes I never asked for. And she still thought of my choices as phases. I didn't blame her anymore. But I also didn't budge, not until I was ready. When we brought Serena home, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet, the crib already set up by Adil, who had spent hours assembling it while I napped in the hospital. I sat on the edge of the bed, rocking her slowly, and thought about what kind of mother I wanted to be. One who chose presence over performance. One who listened more than lectured, and one who taught her daughter that her body, her choices, her story, belonged to her. 3 days later, I called my mother. The phone rang only once before she answered, breathless, as if she'd been waiting by the phone every second. Is everything okay? She asked. Yes, I said, smiling. She's here. She's safe. Her name is Serena. There was silence on the line. Then a choked sob. Thank you for telling me. I won't ask for pictures or anything. Just, thank you. And that was the first time I believed she finally understood that. We took things slow after that. My mom came over in short, planned visits. She brought fruit instead of crowds. She learned to knock and to ask if we needed help instead of assuming. It was uncomfortable for her, this new role of waiting to be invited, but she embraced it. Like a woman finally willing to unlearn what she thought was love. Love, I realized, can be loud. But the kind I needed was quiet, consistent, and respectful. For the rest of the family, the ones who had filled that room under the welcome, baby banner, some of them faded into the background naturally. A few reached out with apologies. Others still don't understand what the big deal was. I stopped trying to explain. You see, I no longer needed their approval. Not when I had finally given myself my own. Serena is almost 8 months old now. She laughs like she's discovering joy for the first time every day. Her hair is thick and wild, and her eyes, deep pools of wonder, remind me of my younger self before the world told me to smile for other people. Sometimes I catch her staring at her own reflection in the mirror, babbling to herself, completely content. And I wonder when we stop doing that. When do we begin to doubt our worth, our boundaries, our truth? I pray she never does. A few weeks ago, I opened the guest book again. Page after page of wishes, silly jokes, parenting tips, and gender guesses. I read each one slowly, carefully. And this time, I didn't feel rage or violation. I felt something else, closure. I pulled out one blank page and wrote a letter of my own. Dear Serena, you were celebrated before you were even born. Loudly, prematurely, without my consent. But that chaos taught your mama how to stand her ground. You are not just a baby. You are my beginning again, and I promise to always choose your timing over everyone else's expectations. With love, Mommy tucked that page gently into the back of the book. Then I closed it and stored it on the highest shelf of the closet, not hidden, not discarded, just resting, like a chapter that served its purpose, because some stories aren't meant to be burned. They're meant to be shelved, learned from, and remembered. Last Sunday, my mom hosted another dinner. This time, she sent a text that said, only come if you want to. No surprises. Just food and conversation. I stared at the screen for a while, then I smiled. I packed Serena's favorite toy, her soft pink blanket, and headed over with a deal. No fear, no tension, just a mother bringing her daughter to a family that was slowly learning how to love her. Right, and when I stepped inside this time, it wasn't 81 guests or banners or baby bottles. It was 6 people seated around a table, bowls of rice and chicken curry steaming in the middle. My mom stood in an apron, smiling shyly. Welcome, she said, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Today's dinner unfolded. Something inside me began to soften. My mother passed me naan without a word, but her eyes lingered just a second longer, like she wanted to say something, but was waiting for the right moment. That pause, that hesitation, was everything. For a woman who once pushed past every boundary in the name of a love, silence was her loudest act of growth. Serena sat on my lap, gnawing on a soft silicone spoon, occasionally squealing in delight. The table wasn't filled with baby games or guesses, just quiet conversation about work, the weather, and a new TV drama everyone seemed to love. Nobody asked how much weight I'd lost, whether I planned to return to work, or what I was feeding her. For once, they saw me as a mother and a woman, not a public project. After dinner, we moved to the living room. My Aunt Zara, who'd once loudly criticized my modern parenting, simply smiled and said, she's beautiful, Amina. She looks strong. Strong. It was such a simple word. But to me, it sounded like music, not cute, not adorable, not a chubby cheeks, but strong. Like someone finally recognized the battle behind the softness. My mom brought out tea and placed it in front of me. It's chamomile, she whispered. Good for stress. I stared down at the cup, my hands curling around it slowly. For years, she pushed remedies and solutions I didn't ask for. But tonight, she offered peace, quiet, warm, and brewed just right. I sipped it. And for the first time in a long time, it tasted like love. When it was time to leave, she walked us out to the car. Adil strapped Serena into her seat while I gathered the leftovers my mom insisted we take. She touched my arm gently. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, but I hope I've earned a little trust back. I looked at her, and saw her, not the overbearing mother, not the event-planning intruder, but a woman learning to be gentle. You have, I said softly. You're trying. That's all I ever wanted. That night, back home, after we tucked Serena in, Adil wrapped his arms around me as we stood in the doorway of her room. She's lucky, he said. Why? Because her mom fought like hell to protect her peace. I didn't say anything, just leaned into him. Because I had spent so long being angry, defensive, protective, and finally, I was just tired. But it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes after a long, hard journey, when your feet are sore but your heart is light. In the days that followed, I found myself letting go a little more. Letting people hold her for 5 minutes instead of 3. Accepting help, even when I didn't need it. Because I realized something no one tells you about motherhood. It's not just about protecting your child from the world, but also about teaching the world how to deserve your child, and to do that, I had to stop hiding. I began inviting people over one by one. No big groups. No pressure. Just little moments, building new memories over tea, music, and diaper changes. I made space for the kind of family I wanted Serena to grow up around. A family that listened, that asked first, that respected silence. Slowly, we became that family, and slowly, I became me again. I still have boundaries. I still say no. And yes, sometimes I offend people who expect access without earning it. But I've learned that my peace is not negotiable. Not for traditions. Not for gossip. Not even for the people who mean well. Especially not for them. Serena will grow up knowing she was loved, ferociously, patiently, imperfectly. But more than anything, I hope she grows up knowing that love doesn't have to be loud. That the most powerful love is the one that stands quietly beside you and says, you don't have to perform to be worthy. Just be. That's enough. Sometimes I still look back on that night with the 81 guests and that glaring "Welcome, baby" banner. I remember the heat rising to my face, the panic in my chest, the hollow feeling of being seen but not known. And I thank that moment, because it woke me up. It turned me from a woman who smiled through discomfort into one who speaks up, even if her voice trembles. Now, as I hold Serena against my chest and feel her breathing, I whisper to her, not about how the world will cheer her on when she wins, but how to walk away when it claps at the wrong time. How to guard her softness without apology. How to trust her own pace, because her story won't be decided by other people's timelines, and neither will mine. So, if you're reading this and you've ever been pressured to share your life before you were ready, know this: you owe no one your milestones. You don't have to perform your joy, and you are allowed to protect your becoming. Let them wait, because the right people won't demand an invitation to your most sacred moments. They'll wait quietly, patiently, until you open the door. And sometimes, opening that door isn't just about letting others in, it's about letting yourself out of the shell you built to protect your most tender parts, out of the fear that people will only love you if you hand them a perfect version of your life, out of the cycle of performing peace instead of truly living in it. One quiet morning, as I nursed Serena in the early blue light, something in me shifted again. I thought about all the women who came before me, my grandmother who raised 9 children without ever being asked how she was doing, my own mother, who tried to protect me in the only language she knew, control, and me, sitting here now, rocking a baby and rewriting the story for both of us. I didn't need to break the chain with bitterness. I could do it with clarity. With softness. I've come to realize that generational healing doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like choosing a different tone, a quieter room, a smaller gathering, a softer word, and other times, it looks like walking away when someone refuses to see you as you are. There is power in boundaries, but there's equal power in knowing when to gently lower your guard. One evening, months later, as I was folding Serena's tiny clothes, my mom called. I answered, half expecting a long monologue, but instead, she simply said, would you like to come over next Friday for dinner? Just you, Adil, and Serena. No guests. No surprises. My heart clenched, not from anxiety, but from a strange, sweet relief. She'd finally learned the language I had been trying to speak all along. That dinner felt different. The lights were dim, the table set simply, a candle flickering between the plates. My mom asked me how I was. Really. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer 10 solutions. She just listened. It was the first time I realized how deeply we had both changed. She, by learning how to love me with open hands, and me, by learning to receive love without fear of being swallowed whole. Later that night, as we packed up to leave, my mom gently kissed Serena's forehead and said, thank you for making me a better mother, even when I didn't know I needed to be. That stayed with me, because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was my daughter's, my mother's, all the women who raised us. And all the women we are becoming now. When I sit down to journal, I don't write about the chaos. I write about the quiet victories, the way Serena smiles when she hears my voice, the small nod my mother gives me when I say no, the way I've stopped just surviving my life and started actually living it. These things don't make for big, loud stories, but they build strong foundations, and foundations last longer than fanfare. There's a framed photo in Serena's nursery now, not from a baby shower, not from a party, but from the day she first sat up on her own. Her smile is wide, her hair messy, her little hands stretched out like she's claiming the whole world. That's the story I'll tell her when she's older, not how people guessed before I was ready, but how I reclaimed every piece of my story, and how I taught her that she can do the same. So if you ever walk into a room expecting peace and find 81 people clapping for a chapter you haven't finished writing, remember this: you can pause, you can walk out, you can start again, you can say, not yet, and that doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you whole, because your story, especially the sacred parts, deserve to bloom on your time, not theirs. And when the moment is right, open the door, stand tall, and say, welcome, on my terms. This is my story, and I chose when to tell it. Thank you for listening. Amina, mother, woman, storyteller. Months passed, and life with Serena began to settle into a rhythm. Some days were slow and tender, rocking her to sleep, tracing the curl of her lashes. Others were chaos incarnate, spilled bottles, diaper explosions, forgotten errands. But through it all, one truth remained constant: I was no longer afraid of being seen, because I had chosen how I'd be seen, and that changed everything. I started writing again, not just journal entries, but stories. Stories for women like me. Stories for the new moms trying to navigate identity and motherhood. Stories for the daughters learning to forgive their mothers without losing themselves in the process. I wrote for the woman who still feels that jolt of panic when someone asks, so, when are you going to share? Because I now know what it costs to give away your truth before it's fully yours. One story I wrote, about a woman who walks into a surprise baby party thrown by people who don't even know how far along she is, got picked up by a parenting blog. The comments poured in, hundreds of women saying, this happened to me. Others wrote, thank you. I thought I was the only one who felt violated by other people's excitement. Reading their words, I cried, not because I felt sad, but because I no longer felt alone. The more I shared on my own terms, the more free I felt. I wasn't trying to be a picture-perfect mother anymore. I was just being me, tired, healing, messy, protective, and fiercely loving. Some days I got it right. Others, I simply survived until bedtime. But in all of it, I was present. I was whole, and I was finally okay with people seeing the cracks, because that's where the truth lived. Serena turned 1 on a warm spring afternoon. Adil and I planned something simple, a picnic in the park. Just the 3 of us. My mom asked if she could come too, just her, no cousins, no decorations, no big reveal. I said yes. And this time, I meant it. She brought a hand-sewn dress she made for Serena. It was pale yellow with tiny embroidered daisies. When she handed it to me, she didn't say, put her in it. She said, only if you want to. That single sentence healed more than she probably realized. As Serena smashed a cupcake between her tiny hands, we all laughed together. No pressure, no performance, just presence. I looked around at that tiny circle, Adil beside me, Serena giggling, my mother quietly sipping tea, and realized this was the family I wanted to build. Not just biologically, but emotionally. A family rooted in respect, trust, and the power of a quiet yes. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, my mom asked, can I take a picture of you too? I nodded. She crouched carefully and snapped a photo, just me holding Serena, both of us barefoot in the grass, faces lit by the last golden light of the day. No banners, she whispered, no crowds. Just love. I smiled. Exactly. That photo now sits framed on our bookshelf. Every time I pass by, I touch it gently, not just because I love what it captures, but because it reminds me of everything it took to get there. The discomfort, the confrontation, the tears, the boundary setting, the rebuilding, all of it was worth it. And now, when someone new in my life asks me, do you have any advice for motherhood? I always say the same thing: protect your peace like it's part of your child, guard it, nurture it, name it, because when you do, you give your child the blueprint to do the same, and they will thank you, not with words, but with the way they walk boldly through their own lives, unafraid to say, not yet, not like this. So here I am, still growing, still learning, still rewriting what motherhood looks like for me. And I've come to understand this: your story doesn't need 81 witnesses, it doesn't need a banner, it just needs your voice trembling, brave, honest, and when you're ready, it needs your permission, and no one else's. This is what I'll teach Serena, and this is what I hope you remember. 2. The most powerful stories are not the ones shouted from rooftops, they're the ones whispered when the world goes quiet, and they begin not with applause, but with a choice to speak. To pause. To protect. To share, only when you're ready, and when that moment comes. You won't need a banner, because the room will already know you arrived, and this time, on your terms. Amina still learning, still growing, still whole, always, on my own time. Years have passed since that day. Serena is now 5, curious, loud in the best ways, and unafraid to say exactly how she feels. The first time she stomped her tiny foot and said, "I don't like that, Mama," I knelt beside her, held her gaze, and smiled. "Good," I said. "Thank you for telling me, because she doesn't need to be polite at the expense of her truth. Not in my house. Not in her life." She asks a lot of questions now. Why do some people hug before asking? Why did Grandma cry when I said I needed space? Why do I have to wear pants when you don't make me wear shoes inside? Every question is an invitation. Every moment, a chance to teach her that her body, her words, and her heart are hers first, and I realize, I'm not just raising a daughter. I'm raising a free woman. Last week, we passed by a baby shower in the park, balloons, laughter, a banner flapping in the wind. Serena pulled at my hand. "Did you have a party like that when I was in your tummy?" I hesitated. "No," I said. "We didn't. Not like that." She looked up at me, wide-eyed. "Why not?" And I took a breath, knelt down, and told her the truth, because someone else tried to have it for us. Before we were ready. Before you were ready. And I had to say no. Not because I wasn't happy about you, but because I loved you so much. I wanted to wait until the moment felt right. She looked thoughtful, then she smiled. "That makes sense. I like waiting for the right moment." And just like that, she understood something that took me years to learn. Sometimes, she flips through the old guest book. I let her now, she can't read all the words yet, but she likes the colors, the hearts, the stickers some relatives added. And when she finds the page I wrote, the letter to her, she always asks me to read it. Every time, I pause before the last line. The one that says, "You were celebrated before you were born, but your mama chose when the world got to clap." And every time, she claps at the end just once. Just softly. But it's perfect. Serena knows how to take up space. But she also knows how to protect it. She's learning that not all attention is love, and not all silence is rejection. She's learning that her timing matters more than other people's expectations. She's learning, in essence, what it took me 3 decades to unlearn, and I couldn't be prouder. My mother and I. We've come a long way. She still struggles with silence, still texts a bit too often, still offers advice when I haven't asked. But now, she always follows it with, "Only if it helps. Feel free to ignore me." And that little sentence? That's how I know she's still trying. Sometimes, healing doesn't look like perfect behavior. It looks like permission to be imperfect together. She and Serena have their own relationship now. One rooted not in obligation, but in curiosity. My mom asks before hugging her. She lets Serena braid her hair, even if it pulls. She listens to her stories about bugs and clouds and unicorns with undivided attention. She's learned how to be a better grandmother, not by force, but by watching the way I mother. That, in itself, is a generational victory. I often think back to the woman I was that night I opened the door and saw those 81 faces staring at me. I was scared, confused, and furious. But I was also standing on the edge of transformation, because that night didn't break me. It birthed me, not just as a mother, but as someone who finally understood that her story didn't need to be shouted to be powerful. It just needed to be owned. Now, when I tell women this story at retreats or in quiet coffee shop conversations, they always lean in. They nod. Some cry. Many whisper, "That happened to me, too." And I always leave them with the same words I leave you with now. You don't have to prove your joy, you don't have to rush your reveal, you don't have to let anyone else narrate your becoming. Wait until you are ready, say the words you want to say, and when you speak them, let the world listen on your terms, because you, too, are worth the pause, worth the silence, worth the timing. And when you finally choose to let the world in, let it be not because they asked, but because you invited them. With all my heart, Amina. Mother, writer, cycle breaker, still choosing peace. Still choosing me. Every single day. A few months ago, I found myself standing in front of a packed auditorium at a local women's wellness event. I'd been invited to speak, not just about motherhood, but about reclaiming your story. I stood behind the podium, staring at the rows of women, some pregnant, some mothers, some daughters, some still figuring out who they were becoming. My palms were sweaty. My heart was steady. I told them everything, and not the sugar-coated version. The real version. About the surprise baby celebration, about the weight of other people's joy crushing my own, about boundaries being seen as betrayal. I told them how I found strength in saying no, and freedom in saying not. As I spoke, I saw tears, nods, silent affirmations. I wasn't just telling my story, I was giving them back theirs. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 23. Her voice trembled. I just found out I'm pregnant. I haven't told anyone, not even my boyfriend. Everyone's going to expect me to be thrilled, but I'm still trying to breathe. I took her hand. You don't owe them your smile, I told her. Not until it's real. She cried. I cried. And I knew that maybe that moment was exactly why I went through mine. Every experience we survive becomes a lamp for someone else's darkness. I think about that every time I get a message from a stranger thanking me for the story. It used to surprise me how many women felt the exact same invasion, the same guilt, the same pressure to celebrate before they even had time to feel safe. Now it just reminds me, we were never alone. We were just silent, but we aren't silent anymore. Serena now knows what privacy means. She knows it's okay to say, no, thank you, when someone asks for a hug. She asks questions that make people pause. Did you ask permission before taking that photo? Or, do I have to answer that? She's not rude. She's aware, and that awareness is what I wish I'd had as a child, but it's okay. She has it now. And I gave it to her. That is my greatest legacy. I've stopped trying to rewrite the past. I've stopped wishing the surprise party never happened. Because the truth is, it cracked me open in ways I didn't know I needed. That it forced me to choose compliance or clarity, and I chose clarity. Clarity that I am allowed to say no, clarity that joy is sacred, clarity that I get to choose how I exist. Not just that I exist. The guestbook still sits on my highest shelf. Not buried. Not forgotten. Just placed where it belongs, in the past. Occasionally, I take it down, flip through the pages, and smile, and not because the party was right, but because I was right to stop it. It's a physical reminder that I once stood in front of an audience I didn't invite, and still found the courage to walk away. That's what healing looks like now. I light candles at the end of long days. I write by hand when Serena naps. I read books slowly, and drink my tea before it goes cold. I no longer live like I'm racing to catch up with other people's expectations. I live like someone who knows exactly where she's going, and who's not in a rush to get there. Serena's laughter still echoes in the hallways. Her drawings cover the fridge. Her little footprints are still on the back porch after she ran through the garden barefoot last week. She's growing. And so am I. But not for the crowd. Not for the photo. Not for the applause. For us. Someday, she'll be older. And maybe she'll have a story like mine. Or maybe, because of all I've learned, she won't. Maybe she'll just know, without needing to unlearn it, that her story is hers. And when she tells it, there won't be 81 guests and a banner waiting there. Will be just one person beside her, asking gently, are you ready to tell it now? And if she says yes, I'll listen. If she says no, I'll wait. With love, with patience, with trust, because that's what she taught me just by being born. This is the story I didn't want to tell, until I realized someone else needed to hear it. But if that someone is you, I hope you remember your life doesn't begin when they notice. It begins when you decide. And it's okay. If that moment comes late, it's okay. If it comes quietly, it's okay. If it comes with a whisper and not a cheer, because when you arrive, truly arrive, that moment will be enough. With everything I've learned, and everything I'm still learning, Amina, daughter, mother, woman, truth teller, and still beautifully unfinished. A few nights ago, I tucked Serena into bed after reading her favorite story, the one about the shy moon who learns to shine in her own time. She always asks me to read it slowly, lingering on the last line, and when she was ready, she lit the sky, without asking permission. After I turned off the lamp and kissed her forehead, she whispered sleepily, Mama, am I like the moon? I paused, my chest tightening in that soft, quiet way only a mother knows. You're exactly like the moon, I whispered back. And you'll shine when you choose. As I sat outside her room, listening to the soft hum of her breathing, I thought about how far we'd come. Not just Serena and me, but me and me. The woman I used to be, the one who smiled through violations, who said yes when she wanted to say no, who thought silence was safer than resistance, was gone, not vanished, just evolved. She was the soil from which this new version of me grew, and I honor her. Too, I look at the life I live now, still messy, still imperfect, but finally rooted in truth. I don't flinch at invitations anymore. I don't perform for approval. And I don't panic when someone asks how I'm doing, because now, I answer honestly, and that honesty doesn't scare me like it used to. It frees me. I've found that the more I speak, the more others do. To support groups, at workshops, over coffee tables, and in grocery store aisles. Women everywhere, whispering truths they've held inside for far too long. I didn't want a gender reveal, but they pressured me. I hated how my birth was live streamed. My partner Posted our ultrasound before I could even cry about it. Asterisk we are all, in some way, trying to reclaim our moments. Trying to undo the myth that joy must be shared instantly to be real, but real joy is sacred. And sacred things deserve protection. Not everything needs to be witnessed to be valid, not every miracle needs an audience, not every chapter needs applause. Sometimes, the most transformative parts of our lives happen quietly, in the in-between spaces, when no one's watching, and that's where I've learned to find the most peace. Serena once asked me if being a mother was hard. I laughed gently. Sometimes. But it's also beautiful. Like planting seeds in soil you've only just learned how to trust. She blinked thoughtfully. So you're still learning? Every day, I said. And probably for the rest of my life. That seemed to satisfy her. She doesn't expect me to be perfect, she just expects me to be real, and that's a gift I never got to give my own mother when I was little, but I'm giving it now, to both of us. One morning, not long ago, my mom and I walked together through the same park where I once had that quiet birthday for Serena. The flowers were blooming, and the wind carried the faint scent of jasmine. We strolled slowly, Serena skipping ahead, stopping now and then to chase butterflies. I'm proud of you, my mother said, without looking at me. I didn't answer right away. I let the moment linger, then I smiled. Thank you. That's all I said. That's all I needed to say. There was a time when I would have asked, for what? When I would have fished for details or doubted her sincerity, but I don't need to anymore. I know what I've done, I know what I've healed, I know what I've become, and sometimes, the best acknowledgement is your own quiet knowing that Serena's story will be different than mine. Not because I'm perfect, but because I've given her tools I never had. Language for boundaries. Space to question. Permission to protect herself, and when she becomes a mother, if she chooses to, I hope she'll remember this, that her milestones are hers, her joy is not a performance, and her story unfolds only when she decides to tell it. Asterisk. And if someone throws her a party before she's ready, if someone tries to narrate her life for her, if someone hangs a banner before she's even whispered her truth, she will know exactly what to do. Asterisk, because she will have grown up watching her mother say, stop. This is mine. Wait. Not yet. I'll tell you, when I'm ready. And the world will wait. I used to think healing meant forgetting. Now I know it means remembering with softness, remembering without bitterness, remembering so that others don't have to repeat your silence. That's why I tell this story, not to relive it, but to release it, offer it as a light in someone else's hallway of doubt. So, if you're standing on the edge of your own truth, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet, let this be your sign. You're allowed to wait. You're allowed to protect your moment. And when you're ready, you're allowed to shine, on your terms, even if no one's clapping, even if the room is empty, even if all you have is your own 2 feet, your own full heart, and a single whisper of courage. You are still the story, and you always have been. Amina still unfolding, still becoming, still mine, and always, always, enough. The final page. But never the end. And even as I write this now, on a quiet evening with Serena asleep down the hall and the soft hum of life settling into every corner of this house, I know there is no true final page. There will always be more. More moments. More lessons. More healing, more pauses. More yes. More no, not today, because stories like mine don't end, they continue. Sometimes, I catch myself thinking about that version of me who stood in front of the banner, heart racing, breath shallow, smile forced. She didn't know how to say no without guilt. She didn't know that anger could be a signal, not a shame. She didn't know that love could coexist with distance, and I don't hate her for not knowing what I thank her for surviving long enough for me to learn what she couldn't. She gave birth to the woman I am today, a woman who doesn't fear disappointment in others. A woman who has learned that peace is not something you find in a quiet room, but something you carry in your chest, no matter how loud the world gets. A woman who no longer performs joy, but lives it quietly, proudly, freely. Serena will have her own heartbreaks, her own boundaries to build and rebuild, her own lessons to unlearn. I won't be able to protect her from every moment of confusion or pain, but I will be there. Not to fix it, to witness, to listen, to remind her that she is never too much or too little to take up space, and that her voice, the trembling, messy, evolving voice, is still worthy of being heard. She might not remember the bedtime stories word for word, or the quiet picnics we had instead of loud celebrations, but she'll remember how she felt, safe, seen, enough, and that feeling? That will be her anchor when the world tries to tell her otherwise, and maybe, just maybe, she'll sit with her own daughter one day. She'll tell her about the day she learned about the moon, and how it taught her to shine without asking permission. She'll tell her that her grandma once threw a party too early, and that her mama stood in a doorway and chose herself, and how that single moment changed everything, not in fireworks, but in roots. That's what legacy is, I think. Not fame, not perfection, not noise, but truth. passed down like a thread, binding generations of women who refuse to be hurried into visibility. So here I am, years after that moment, and I am still choosing myself, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. And I am writing to you, not as a woman who has it all figured out, but as someone who's been where you are, holding your truth close, unsure who deserves to hear it, afraid that waiting means missing the moment. Let me tell you something. I had to learn the hard way. Waiting is not weakness. It is wisdom. Your life is not a party for others to attend. It is a journey for you to walk. And when you arrive at your own milestones, clap for yourself first, smile for yourself first, speak your truth when it's ripe, not when it's expected, because the story isn't special when it's told too soon. It's special when it's told with clarity. So if you've been holding back, if there's a banner waiting, or a room full of faces expecting your joy, take your time, step back, breathe, and when you're ready, you'll know, your voice will rise, not to meet their applause, but to honor your own becoming. And if no one else claps, know that somewhere, there's a woman sitting in the quiet, reading this, whispering, me too. And that is enough. With all my heart, Amina, mother, witness, survivor, healer, and always telling the truth, one breath at a time, this time, by choice, this time, for me, and this time forever. The story continues, and so, the story breathes on, not through grand endings or final pages, but through the everyday moments I once overlooked, like when Serena wakes me up before dawn and crawls into bed beside me, whispering, "Mama, I had a dream that I was flying, but I came back just to hug you." Or when I look into the mirror and no longer see a woman trying to keep up, but one who stands still, centered, grounded, certain that that's how healing lives, not in dramatic revelations, but in the quiet proof of who we've become when no one is watching. The world hasn't slowed down. People still expect access, explanations, updates. Strangers still ask invasive questions, family still makes assumptions, and not everyone applauds boundaries. But I've changed. I no longer shrink to fit comfort. I no longer soften truth to avoid discomfort. I no longer doubt the power of a simple, firm, not right now. That, in itself, is a revolution, and with every passing season, I notice how much lighter I've become. Not because I've lost anything, but because I've released what never belonged to me, the expectations, the guilt, the performative smiles. Now, I live in a slower rhythm. I say no more often. I say yes, only when I mean it. I love people from the place of truth, not obligation, and I've learned that the most honest kind of love respects your silence as much as your celebration. Last week, I found a drawing Serena made at school. It was a picture of our family, me, her, and a deal. Above our heads, in crooked letters, she wrote, "My mama is brave because she says things only when she's ready." I sat on the floor with that paper in my hands, tears welling in my eyes, not from pain, but from awe. Because what once felt like a wound had become a lesson so deeply planted, it was now growing inside her, and that's all I ever wanted. I've since shared parts of my story on stages, in circles, in small handwritten letters to women who feel alone. But I always begin and end with the same words: you are allowed to begin slowly. Because somewhere out there, another woman is standing in front of a door she didn't open, hearing voices she didn't invite, facing a crowd that claps for a chapter she hasn't written, and she deserves to know, it's not too late to step back and reclaim your page. Sometimes, I'm asked, if you could go back, would you still walk into that party? And I always say yes. Not because it was okay, but because it opened the door to the woman I became on the other side. That moment of misalignment gave birth to a lifetime of reclaiming, of rebuilding, of rewriting. Today, I sit with my story the way I sit with an old friend. I no longer need to dissect it. I don't retell it to bleed, I retell it to bloom. To show that it's possible to love again, trust again, celebrate again, differently, deliberately, on your own terms, because that's the gift of healing, not erasing what hurt, but creating something stronger with the pieces. And when Serena is grown, with stories of her own, when she calls me late at night, unsure if she should share her joy, her grief, her truth with the world, I'll tell her exactly what I wish someone told me: you get to choose, and that choice is sacred. Until then, I'll keep walking this road, one story at a time, one pause at a time, one boundary at a time, still unfolding, still softening, still rising, because this isn't just my story anymore. It's ours, yours, and mine, and together, we keep writing. Not because they're watching, but because we finally know who we are. This is the story of the woman who walked away from the applause and found her own rhythm. This is the story of the daughter who became a mother and broke the chain with tenderness. This is the story of a life no longer lived on anyone else's timeline. This is your permission, and if no one has ever said it to you before, let me say it now: you're allowed to begin again. You're allowed to wait. You're allowed to whisper. You're allowed to shine quietly, and that is more than enough. Forever becoming Amina, mother of one, healer of many, and author of her own story. At last, the older Serena grows, the more I notice something beautiful. She doesn't rush Not in her words, not in her art, not in her discoveries. She takes her time with things, observes before reacting, pauses before deciding. I used to think children inherited chaos by default, but now I know, they absorb what we model. And I modeled stillness, after a life that knew only the noise of pleasing, the noise of survival, the noise of people deciding for me. She grew from my silence, but she thrives because I finally spoke sometimes. She asks about that night, the party, as she calls it now. I've told her the age-appropriate version, skipping the weight of disappointment but not the truth. It was a surprise, I explain. And sometimes, surprises aren't always good when you aren't ready. She wrinkles her nose. Why didn't you just tell them you didn't want it? I tried, I say honestly. But back then, I didn't know how. I thought saying no would make people stop loving me. She shakes her head fiercely. That's silly. And I smile, because it is. And because she'll never think that way, not if I can help it. Years from now, Serena will live her own life, make her own mistakes, build her own boundaries. I won't be able to walk every step with her, but I hope she'll carry these truths the way she once carried her little stuffed rabbit, worn and certain in her grasp. You don't have to explain your no. Your joy is yours before it belongs to anyone else. And the right people will wait, quietly, patiently, until you open the door. I've started journaling again, but this time it's different. I don't write only for me anymore. I write for the woman Serena will become, so that someday, when she is sifting through drawers and notebooks long after I am gone, she'll read my words and know, I fought for her peace with every ounce of mine. That is the kind of mother I wanted to be, that is the kind of woman I chose to become. And to the woman reading this now, still unsure if her story is worth telling, hear me. You don't need permission, you don't need the perfect moment, you don't need a banner to prove that your voice matters. All you need is a truth you're ready to carry out of the silence, even if you whisper it, even if it trembles, even if you only say it to yourself, because that's how all revolutions begin, quietly. Sometimes healing doesn't look like loud victories. Sometimes it looks like a gentle breakfast with your child where no one interrupts. Sometimes it's choosing not to attend an event that drains you. Sometimes it's walking away from a legacy that doesn't fit. And sometimes, healing is knowing you can show up fully, not as they expected you, but as you. Serena told me recently, Mama, I think your superpower is that you don't rush anymore. It made me laugh. Not because she was wrong, but because she's right in a way I hadn't named yet. I don't rush anymore, and not my story, not my joy, and not my healing, and maybe that is a kind of superpower. The kind we earn when we stop performing, and start living that so. Here, now, as I close this chapter, not with finality, but with deep gratitude, I offer you this. Let your story unfold in the time it needs, let it breathe, let it simmer, let it become. You don't owe the world a single page before you're ready, and when the time comes, you won't need a stage. You'll just need a whisper and a little light. The rest will find you. With love, always. Amino. A woman who once stood frozen in a doorway, and who now walks boldly through her own. The story continues, and so will yours. Write it slowly, write it truly. There's a soft truth I've come to carry like a second skin. Some stories don't end. They echo. They evolve. They move with us. And mine? It walks beside me now. Not behind me like a shadow, not ahead like a burden, but next to me. Like an old friend, one I no longer resent, one I've forgiven, one who reminds me of the woman I had to become. It surprises people sometimes when I say I'm grateful for that overwhelming night, for the banner, for the 81 people who clapped before I could breathe, because without that moment, I might still be lost in a version of my life I didn't write, one shaped by others' joy, others' timelines, others' approval. Instead, I was shaken awake, forced to choose. And in choosing differently, I chose myself. Serena is older now, 6, and curious about everything. She's into stars and rainstorms and asking impossible questions like, Mama, do stories ever sleep? I tell her, no. They rest, sometimes. But they always wake up when we need them again. And she nods like she understands something deeper than language. Maybe she does. Maybe she knows this story of ours will live long after it's written. Because it was never about the party. It was always about the power to pause, to protect, to begin again. She draws a lot these days. Often, she brings me a picture with little stick figures under a sky of hearts or stars. Sometimes there's a sun, sometimes a moon. One evening, she handed me a picture where we were both wearing capes. I asked, what are we doing in this one? She beamed, saving the day. From what? She thought for a second. From rushing. And I held that paper like it was made of gold. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I think of the women I've met through telling this story. Women who came up to me, eyes wide with recognition, as if I'd cracked something open they'd long buried. Point one whispered, they threw me a party, too. I smiled the whole time, but I felt like I was disappearing. Another said, I didn't know it was okay to say, not yet, until I heard you say it. And I realized then that sharing our truth isn't just brave, it's sacred. It's a ripple that becomes a wave. That we live in a world that rushes women through every chapter: love, marriage, motherhood, success, forgiveness, grief, as if there's a prize for moving fast. As if depth is less important than display, but we know better now. That we know the real magic happens when we move slowly, when we feel fully, when we say, wait, I'm not ready, and mean it. I no longer explain my boundaries, I no longer soften my note, I no longer feel guilty for walking away from applause meant for a version of me that never existed, because I'm not here to be understood by everyone, I'm here to be true. To myself. To my daughter. To the story we're still writing together. Serena sometimes asks, Mama, do you think I'll have a story like yours? And I always say the same thing: you'll have your own story, and you'll tell it when you're ready. Because she doesn't have to repeat my pain to inherit my strength, she just has to see me living free, to know what freedom looks like. So here I am, still writing, still healing, still holding the pen with both hands. And if this is the page where you meet me, let me say what I wish someone had said to me before I ever stepped into that room with the banner: you are not behind, you are not too quiet, you are not ungrateful, you are becoming. And that is the bravest thing of all. One day, when Serena is grown, and finds herself standing in front of her own door, faced with applause she didn't invite or expectations she didn't agree to, I hope she remembers this story, not to avoid the moment, but to own it. Decide what comes next. Say, this is mine, and I will tell it when the time is right. And if she hesitates, if she wonders whether she's strong enough, I'll remind her, she comes from a long line of women who learned to speak when their voices were shaky, who stood in doorways with trembling hands and said no to noise, who planted their roots not in approval, but in truth. And she will bloom on her time. I in her voice, I in her light. So yes, the story continues, not in loud ways, not in parades or speeches, but in every quiet decision to reclaim what is yours. Wait. Whisper. Write it slowly, and when you're ready, we'll be listening, with our hands on our hearts and no banners in sight, just space and love and the softest kind of applause. Amina, mother, storyteller, and now, finally, free. This story lives, and so do I. The older I get, the more I realize that freedom doesn't arrive in a thunderclap, it arrives in layers. In tiny, quiet choices that build on top of each other like stepping stones over deep water, saying no without an explanation, leaving messages unanswered, unfollowing people who only see you in fragments, choosing sleep over social obligation. Or simply sitting still, when you used to rush to prove you were okay. Those small things, they add up. They become a life, and my life now? It's slow, but sacred, unapologetic, honest. Adil has grown with me in this new chapter. He was never the loudest voice in the room, but now, he is the first to ask, do you feel ready for this? Before we make any big decision. He doesn't speak for me, yet he listens to me, and there's something powerful about a partner who learns your rhythm instead of expecting you to keep up with theirs. That we've grown quieter as a couple, but not distant, intentional. Evenings with tea and no phones. Weekends with Serena and no plans. We don't chase after milestones anymore. We honor the pace of presence. Sometimes, I'm invited to speak at parenting panels or women's retreats. They ask me to talk about boundaries, healing, motherhood. And while I'm always honored, I never pretend to have all the answers. I start every talk by saying, I didn't come here to give advice. I came here to remind you that your timing is enough. That's it, because too many of us have been taught that our readiness is an inconvenience. That waiting is weakness. That stillness means we've missed the boat. But stillness is a choice, and readiness is power, and you don't have to leap just because someone's shouting, go. Serena once asked me why I cry sometimes when she hugs me unexpectedly. I didn't know how to explain it in words she'd understand, so I simply said, because when I was your age, I didn't know hugs could feel this safe. She nodded, thoughtful as always. But they do now, right? They do now, I whispered, holding her tighter, because what was once unfamiliar is now my home, because what was once fear is now joy, because what was once silence is now love, in her voice, in mine, in everything we've rebuilt, every now. And then, I think of the people at that party, the ones clapping, the ones smiling, the ones completely unaware that they were witnessing a version of me I was shedding in real time. I used to feel anger when I thought of them, but now, I feel distance, not detachment, growth. That I understand now. Most of them weren't trying to hurt me. They were doing what they thought was kind, what they'd seen done 100 times before. But tradition without empathy can be cruel, as celebration without consent can be harmful, and love, when loud and unaware, can still feel like betrayal. That I don't hold grudges anymore. But I also don't open my door to everyone. And that's okay. You can forgive and still protect your peace. You can understand and still say, not in my space. You can heal and still set limits. I wish someone had told me that years ago. I wish someone had said, you don't have to host your healing. Because for a long time, I thought I had to perform my growth for others to believe it was real. Now I know better. Healing isn't a show, it's a quiet room where you learn to breathe without apology, and that's where I live now, in that room. With Serena's giggles echoing in the hallway, Adil's quiet presence in the kitchen, and a stillness that no longer feels empty, but earned. Sometimes, I light a candle and write by hand, not for a blog, not for a book deal, but for me, a day. Sentence at a time. A truth at a time. A breath at a time. That there's a tree outside Serena's window. It's tall, crooked, beautiful in the way wild things are. She loves to watch it through the seasons, how it blooms late in spring, how its leaves fall slower than the others in autumn. It's always the last one, she told me once, but it's the prettiest. I smiled. That tree has become a quiet symbol of everything I believe now. Grow slow, bloom late, fall gently, and still be enough. Serena will grow up one day and carry pieces of me in her hands, even if she doesn't know it. She'll walk into rooms I'll never see, face choices I'll never know about. And my greatest hope is that she hears my voice in those moments, not giving commands, not shouting directions, but softly whispering. You are allowed to choose, even if no one else understands, even if the world is clapping for something you didn't ask for, even if you're the last one to bloom, especially then. I don't know what stories will come next for me. I'm no longer in a rush to find out. I just know they'll come from truth, not obligation. From softness, not survival, and when they do, I'll write them slowly, because this life I've built, this second skin, this freedom, this fierce love, is too precious to hurry. So here I am, still choosing silence when it serves me, still speaking up when it matters, still protecting the moment before it's ready to be shared, still becoming with love that grows deeper every day. Amina, woman, writer, mother, and the author of her own becoming, and not once, not twice, but always is still unfolding and still home.